Hello, literature lovers, and welcome to 21 Conversations, the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. I'm Dabney Sanders, board chair of the Greensboro Literary Organization. Greensboro Bound is so excited to present to you these 21 conversations, our effort to create something unique and special for our community within the confines of our continued virtual environment. 21 Conversations pays homage to North Carolina's rich literary history while broadening our tent to welcome in voices from outside of our own microcosm of experience. This featured presentation is but a taste of the 52 authors that we have gathered together in a series of delightful, sometimes unexpected, but always edifying conversations. Since our inception, Greensboro Bound has been committed to providing programs just like the one you are about to watch, 100% free to our community. And in order to do that, we need the financial support, both big and small, of readers just like you. Please support Greensboro Bound by giving now. The text to give phone number as well as our website are on your screen. A sustaining gift of just $15 a month, or the cost of a single children's book, will help us remain financially solvent throughout the year. I also want to take a moment to thank our sustaining supporters, without whom Greensboro Bound would not be possible. Our utmost gratitude to the Edward M. Armfield Senior Foundation, the Ruth Lands Memorial Fund, and Arts Greensboro for their continued belief in our vision to bring together readers and writers of all genres, ages, ethnicities, identities, and voices to foster an understanding of writing as a process that allows free expression, deepens critical thought, and helps sustain a culture of inquiry and delight that is open to all. Thank you again for joining us for the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. Please enjoy the conversation.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Greensboro Bound Virtual Literary Festival 2021 Non-Binary Authors YA panel. With us today, we have author Mason Deaver, whose first novel was I Wish You All the Best. They are a librarian from a small town in North Carolina, and their first work was a Junior Library Guild selection, which is great. And their current novel that we're going to be talking about today is The Ghosts We Keep, which is an absolutely wonderful novel. And we're also joined by Nita Tyndall, who's a passionate queer advocate and literary translator, whose works have appeared in Autostraddle and was part of the Lambda Literary Writers Retreat in 2017. And their first book is Who I Was With Her, which is going to be the other book we're talking about today. So, and I'm Shannon from Greensboro Bound and Scuppernong Books, your somewhat guide into this experience. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Mason and Nita to tell us a little bit about their current books that we're going to be talking about today.
I can go first, Nita, if that.
Yeah, that's totally
we'll go alphabetical. Yeah, my second book, The Ghost We Keep, comes out June 1st of this year. It is all about Liam, who is a non-binary teenager who suddenly loses their brother in a hit-and-run accident, and that sort of turns Liam's world on its axis. And while battling with grief and depression and PTSD, Liam is also kind of in the throes of losing their best friends and the only two people they feel that they've ever connected with, really. But then sort of in the middle of all that, Liam meets Marcus, who is Ethan's best friend, and the two of them connect, and they realize that they may have more in common than they thought, and they also may have each known Ethan in different ways than the other did. And yeah, story about grief, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and like I said, comes out June 1st this year.
Cool, and it's wonderful. You should read it. And Nita.
So I'm Nita. I'm the author of Who I Was With Her, which came out this past September. It's about Corinne, a bisexual cross-country runner who loses her secret girlfriend Maggie in a car accident. And because no one knew that they were together, Corinne has no one to turn to when Maggie dies. So actually kind of like Liam, honestly. I think Liam and Corinne would probably get along pretty well.
Honestly, probably.
Until Corinne meets Maggie's ex-girlfriend, Alyssa, and through her is able to kind of figure out and like reconcile with her feelings of grief over Maggie and over the fact that nobody knew about them.
Great. And I actually, reading both of these books was an experience for me because they're so different and yet so similar and deal with some really cool themes. Both of the novels deal pretty heavily with the subject of grief, obviously. And I'm just curious, why do you think honest depictions of grief appear so rarely in the YA genre? And what made you want to write about it?
I think for me, one reason is that grief can feel incredibly personal, on a very on a very scary level. Whenever I was writing this book, the original sort of premise was about Liam losing their father, which came from basically my life. And so in writing that, I was trying to get these feelings and these emotions out. And it was stuff I had never processed and grief that I was still going through while writing it. And I had to go to my editor and just be like, hey, I know that I know what you're gonna say is like, if something is hard, you should push through it. But like I cannot bring myself to like really dive into this. Can we change it to a brother? And my editor was surprisingly like, yeah, like that makes complete sense. Like sometimes stepping away from something is the best alternative. Putting like that extra space between you and a subject matter, because then it allows you to see it through a different lens. And so yeah, I think it's rarely seen because it's so hard to write, and it's very scary.
Yeah, same for me. I really wanted to dive into how both like we deal with grief, especially now in the age of social media, where like everyone's grief gets to be very extraordinarily public to a point where it can be a little performative, like not necessarily in a bad way, but it's this kind of collective thing that we all do together, but also it's still very intensely private. So I wanted to explore, okay, how do you grieve that when you don't have that way to process that? Plus I wanted to look at like, I think there's a specific way we talk about teenagers who die young or people who die very young or very suddenly or very tragically that I don't get to see a lot of in media, that I in a way that like doesn't martyrize them. So I really wanted to look at that and look at, okay, what is it like? What is it like when, you lose someone and everyone else has this different idea of who they were than the person that you saw?
Mm.
And that actually brings up something that I liked that both of your novels touched on. I really liked how the books both show that we can have mixed feelings toward the people that we're grieving for, that it's not all just positive memories. And being a teenager is already so full of conflicting emotions. I would love to hear more about how you went about weaving in those not so positive feelings, because your characters never came off as whiny or, jaded in a way that seemed like they couldn't come back from. And I'd love to hear more about how you made those decisions of the positive and negative, very complex feelings that Liam and Corinne both have for the people they're grieving. And jump in.
I'm gonna let Nita.
Yeah,
I'm gonna let Nita go first. I don't want to go first every time.
I think Goodreads might disagree with you on Corinne not coming across as whiny or selfish from the stuff I've seen, and I don't even try to go on there, but I mean, I wanted her to be that way. I wanted to write a very selfish girl. Because I think grief can be selfish. So I deliberately wanted to write a girl who was very angry, who is selfish a lot of the time in the novel, and who has to realize that about herself and has to figure that out and figure out that is both like part of her grieving process and also who she is at that point in her life. Because I was selfish when I was 16, 17. Like I was extremely self-centered at that time, and I wanted to write a girl who was specifically like that, and like, yeah, maybe a little bit whiny, because like we can be like, we're not, especially teenagers aren't perfect. So I definitely wanted to show that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally just piggyback off of Nita here because like that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to show. I wanted to show a character who was selfish because I do believe that grief needs to be selfish at sometimes because it's something that you have to go through, and at points you do have to go through it alone. And it's not always a bad thing to be selfish. Like I feel like that's a thing that like we've centered on as people. I don't really know why, but like sometimes being selfish is not an inherently bad thing. It just means that you're caring for yourself sometimes. Um, but yeah, and then Liam, I I kind of actually hope that people don't like Liam in a way, because like Nita has said about Kareem, like Liam is selfish and needy and whiny at some points and doesn't know how to process his feelings about their brother. And like, for sorry, I should clarify. Liam uses both he and they pronouns. But like 16 is such a weird time. Being a teenager is just weird in general. And there's so many new feelings that you do not know how to deal with. And so to add on top of that, grief and PTSD and depression and like really, really heavy anxiety, it's just like this perfect cocktail of of a messed up brain that I can very vividly remember, like going through both in my teenage years and as an adult when my father passed. Um, and so I just really wanted, I guess, sorry, I'm mixing up my words. I guess like my main goal was just to portray Liam as real as I possibly could, because at the end of the day that's what I wanted him to come across as, was just like this messy imperfect portrayal of grief, because that's what grief always ends up being. There's no one perfect way to grieve, and like you're gonna hurt people in the process, and like you're going to be hurt by people, and it just is a long answer, sorry. But yeah, like I think the best thing that I could have done was just try to portray it realistically, which meant portraying it messily.
And I hate to tell you, neither of you succeeded in making your main characters unlikable, because I absolutely loved
Damn
them
it.
both. And part of the reason I love them is exactly the things you're talking about. It's the fact that they were very real and selfish, but not unjustifiably selfish. Like I don't consider that the same as like whiny, like man, nothing ever goes my way. Like they have some heavy stuff happening. It's justifiable that they're selfish at this time in their lives. But both of them, piggybacking off of this, in both of your novels, the main characters seem to have this kind of light bulb moment at some point in the text. They're like, oh, other people are grieving just as much as I am, whether it's about parents or like friends of the person who has died in either book. I kind of love that they have this, oh, everyone else is going through something too, because I feel like grief can turn us inward a lot so that we kind of lose track of what's happening around us and what's happening to the people around us. And so is that an experience you've both ever had personally, or where did you draw that from?
Mason, feel free to go first on that one.
Oh boy, I wish I could give like this in-depth answer to where my version of that came from, because it involves my mother and having like I mean I can talk about it in like it I don't want to talk about it because it's her story. It's not my business to talk about it. Frankly, like it just came from me having a conversation with her, just a frank, blunt conversation with her about the things that she had experienced dealing with the death of my father. And for the first time, I remembered seeing my mother, who still is and always has been like this very strong person in my life, and someone I always looked up to. Like growing up, I was basically my mom's kid. My brother was my dad's kid. I was my mom's. And just having this very frank, blunt, very human conversation with her about the emotions that she was experiencing and the things that she had to deal with, being like quote unquote like the next of kin in this situation, like as my father's wife, it was her responsibility to take care of like all of these things. um and sort of the burden that laid on her, and then just the months afterwards of just like her processing her grief and living in the same house as her as she went through all of that. So I think really the moment, and it wasn't exactly a realization of like, oh, other people are going through this, but it was this very grounding moment of just like other people experienced this traumatic event in a completely different way than I did. And that's sort of what I wanted to translate into the book. And I think it comes across. Um, but like, grief is just like this multi-layered thing that everyone everywhere is going to process differently. Like no two experiences are really ever the same.
Yeah, definitely going off of that too. I had a similar realization. My Nana died in 2018, and I wow, don't remember how old I was because I forgot how time works. But
What is
definitely I was
time?
what is time? I was an adult by that point. It was this realization, and I'd had this realization before she died, of that she was a great Nana to me, but she was always not a good person in general, and kind of realizing that and also seeing that at her funeral, like how my mom was processing, especially because she was not a great mother-in-law, versus like how my dad was processing or how my aunt was processing, like realizing, or how I was processing, even just realizing that, oh, we all have different ideas of who this person was, and they're all the same person, but just kind of that reconciliation of also just being an adult and realizing like, oh, the people that I idolized when I was growing up, like have flaws and are actual actual people who did not great things to some of the people I love. So it's just, yeah, it's that realization.
You guys are really good at springboarding like right into my next question. Bravo.
We plotted this.
Absolutely.
Because once again, in both novels, Corinne and Liam both find themselves, as they're grieving, they actually find a weird and surprising amount of comfort from someone else that they might not normally have spent time with. For Liam, it was Ethan's friend Marcus, and for Corinne, it was Alyssa, who had also been involved previously with her girlfriend Maggie. And I just would love to hear what you think about what grieving and going through this kind of process of grief does to bring people together who would normally not ever really think to interact at all, but suddenly they're the only person you feel like you can go to about this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was kind of not the catalyst of the whole book, but I wanted Corinne to have one person who she felt like she could initially process all of this with. And I think in my first drafts, it was actually Maggie's brother. And I was going to have him be a bigger part of the story. And then I was like, no, there's like stereotypes in the queer community that are totally true, that we all like know each other. Everybody's dated the same people, because the dating pool is so tiny. So I was like, I'm going to get Maggie's ex-girlfriend instead, for the drama. But I think, and it's true, I mean, they wouldn't have met outside of Maggie's funeral. And I like that both. I like that as a writer because I like that conflict of, oh, these are two people who never would have gotten together or even talked outside of this very specific circumstance. So now that they are together, okay, what can I do? How are they going to interact? What are their interactions going to be like? What are they going to feel about each other? Because it's still very awkward meeting someone you're dating's ex when that said person is alive. When said person is no longer alive and you're meeting their ex, it's like, oh, this is very weird because we are now bonding over this person that we one are both grieving, and two, both might actually have completely different perceptions of based on how they were when we dated them. So
Yeah, I think the answer for this one lies in the question, and it might just be a total carbon copy of Nita's answer, but like it is this one specific thing that draws people together, and frankly, it's not a thing that everyone has gone through. I think everyone's grieved something on some level, but losing someone super close to you can happen at any point in time in life, and so it's there are a million different experiences with it. So whenever you're surrounded, not surrounded exactly, but like whenever you have the chance to interact with people who have gone through the same exact thing that you have, I think there's always that desire to like leap onto that, and sort of share that experience with someone. I think in Liam's case it's weird because you know, they have their parents who have lost a child, but you know, talking to parents is weird and hard and not fun. And even at 25, I don't like talking to my mother about some things. And at 16, it was I couldn't talk to her about anything. But then I think the fun part with what I wanted to do was like Liam and Marcus meeting kind of again is like incidental and kind of accidental, and they just stumble upon each other and they sort of realize that there is this connection between the two of them. I think the age difference is like a year, but you know, even whenever you're that age, you don't want to necessarily interact with your younger siblings or your I'm mixing up my words. You don't want to interact with your best friends like younger siblings. I remember my brother's friends feeling like that way about me, and it was cool to hang out with them, but also, you know, looking back on it, very obvious they did not want to hang out with someone who was 4 years younger than them. And so I think that kind of makes it like a little bit more tense in my head. It's like these are two people who haven't shared anything except for Ethan. And that was like the core of what I wanted to get at, was how these two people experience grief. I keep reiterating the same point. How these two people experience grief in incredibly similar, but also incredibly different ways.
Don't worry, you're doing great. And this actually brings up, I know Marcus obviously is not the main character of The Ghosts We Keep, but I do find it interesting how many parallels there were between Marcus's and Corinne's grieving experiences. And I would just love to hear what you both have to say about what it would be like, or if you've experienced it, what it is like to grieve something or someone in your life that no one else in your life knew existed. Because that's not, you know, a lot of times if you lose a parent or, you know, a sibling, you know, the entire wider world, as Nita said, can know about it on Instagram, like sometimes too much. But what is it like to, or do you think, to grieve someone or something that no one else in the world even knew existed for you, even though it was a huge part of your life?
For I can get like super personal about this. I'm not going to, but I like, you know, I'll tell the story. For me, it was pulling from the experience of being a teenager and like being in love with this boy, and like having a very not intense, but like we were each other's like best friend. And then very suddenly he just like disappeared. And I only found out later that he had been sent to a place that queer people do not want to be sent to, which was a very fun experience to like figure that out. And so like our relationship was secretive. We didn't tell anybody, and I'm not trying to give too many details because it's not, again, not my like experience to tell to multiple people. But I mean, like we weren't open about anything. And so knowing all of that happened and then like sort of blaming myself in a way for some of the things that happened, it was very scary and incredibly hard to deal with because there was no one I could talk to about it. No one knew, and I wasn't going to talk to anyone about it. I didn't want to out him. I didn't want to out myself. And so I kind of just like bottled in those feelings, which is not not the most healthy way to deal with your emotions, especially whenever you're like 16. But yeah, so in writing Marcus, I just remembered that loneliness and grieving for someone who had not died necessarily, but had just completely vanished from my life, and just remembering like the pain that I felt from that.
Nita, I want your answer to this too, by the way. It wasn't just for Mason. This is also a question for you.
No,
I
you're
was
good.
clear about that.
So I've never had to grieve someone in secret. I don't think. I definitely remember that. I think, like Mason said, I did kind of draw on my own experiences of being closeted too, and of being fearful of losing someone, of someone finding out. I have, since we're getting personal on Maine, a very deep fear of people I love dying, and a deep fear of dying in general. And for me, I think ultimately Corinne's story was born out of that fear, and that fear of like, oh, what if the person I was dating in high school, and we did eventually come out, not by choice, but what if something had happened to her when we were dating, and what if something had happened and nobody had known that we were dating? So a lot of this book was born out of just that fear of people I love dying. And like, then I was like, okay, well, what if it had happened when, when we were in high school and no one had known we were together? And like trying to kind of think through my own worst case scenarios, honestly, to process them a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I actually like that you brought this up, because I do think there are a lot of parallels in these books to the queer experience, even though they're not expressly about being queer. And that's something I actually really liked about both of these novels, is that they have queer and non-binary characters in them, but the story is not about their queerness, if that makes sense. Like, it's about these people who happen to be queer and or non-binary, who are also dealing with these huge universal truths in life. And why do you think it's important to have queer stories that focus on themes besides sexuality and gender identity? Like, they have completely other themes and just happen to feature queer characters.
I think both are important. I think for me, like initially when I started writing this back in 2015, good Lord. Oh God, speaking of what is time. I was in college. I was at the point of my life where I was tired of queer stories that were only about queerness. I was like, please let me just have a plot that is not coming out, like where the entire story isn't coming out. And while I think Corinne definitely still has to figure out her coming out journey, I specifically did not want to write, a capital C coming out narrative, just because for me personally, that I was very tired of those stories. And there was definitely a point, definitely not so much anymore, but there was a point like in the YA market where that was the dominant narrative that we were getting for queer representation, was just the coming out story. And while I think those are still necessary, I think we still need stories with queer characters where that isn't their journey, because for some readers, like that's not going to always be their journey, or that's like not what they're going to always want the focus to be on. I shouldn't say it's not always going to be their journey, because coming out is literally a lifelong thing. But I don't know, sometimes I just want to read about incidental queer people, and they can be dealing with terrible sad things, and they can also be dealing with some queer things on the side. But like, I just wanted to write something where that was the focus, because that was what I needed and that was what I wanted to read. So
I think for me it was very purposeful. And again, my answer lies in the question. Is like, queer people just go through things in life, and queerness is not always related. Like, whenever I was dealing with the death of my father in the grieving process, like my being trans never came into effect. It was never a point of contention. It was never necessary to the discussion. And so it was like, to steal Nita's answer, I wanted a story that was about grief, where it just so happened that the main character and some of the side characters are queer. I think actually all the side characters are queer, besides like the parents. I don't know when this is gonna come out. I might be spoiling something. But that's just life. Like, queer people go through things every single day where like their queerness, their sexuality, their gender identity doesn't come into effect. There are days where I legit just don't think about the fact that I'm trans, and those days I don't really have much going on. But it's like, and there are some days where it's like all that I can think about. And like, this is like my petty no, but like in copy edits for The Ghosts We Keep, and and this is, I do not mean this in any way, shape, or form to shade the copy editor or the line editor. I do not know their name. I'm very sorry. I think that was very purposeful. But there was a note where it was one of the smaller scenes where Liam was discussing gender identity and how they feel. And, you know, it was very purposeful. I wanted to say something about it and then move on. And the copy editor was left a note that was just to the effect of, I think that you don't explore gender enough in this book and like all this stuff. And, you know, I think you need to have more information here. And my my first grievance with that was that I believe it was during the line editing process, which if you do not know a lot about writing books, it is very hard to add large amounts of information during the line editing process because stuff is already numbered and they don't want you to add too much. And it was either going to be full explanations or like I wasn't going to skimp on this. But I think my note, I was probably meaner than I should have been. I think the note that I left was like, listen, my last book was the Trans 101 guide. You know, that's not what I'm here to write about. If they want that kind of narrative, if they want to know more about the trans experience, then like they can go read the other book. Like that's just not what I was there to do. It's very purposeful that I avoided that. And, you know, not to say I didn't try to include some stuff like Joel, a side character, is a trans boy. And so, you know, that involved a lot of research as to like what being a trans boy, what that experience is, because I'm not a trans boy. And, you know, there's some other plot points in the book that I will not spoil because it is relevant to the plot. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't the book that I was trying to write. I wanted to write about grief that just so happens to star a trans main character.
That was great. And it's funny because as you were saying that, I had the same thought of like, well, why don't they just go read I Wish You All the Best? It's a great book.
I mean,
and it's
like,
about exactly that. Go read that one.
Listen,
Which I would have sitting here today, but I sold out over the weekend again at the shop, so I don't have a copy to hold up.
Oh, yeah. Listen, the amount of messages I get from, again, not to be mean, but from like cishet people that are like, this taught me so much about being non-binary. I'm like, good for you, I guess. It's like, didn't write it for that, but I guess if it taught you a lesson.
I got a note early on in the process that was like, can you please like make much more clear why Corinne is afraid to come out? And I'm like, that's going to be obvious to queer readers, especially because this is set in a very small rural town in North Carolina. Like I was like, I'll add in a few things, but I'm gonna leave that one. we're not over explaining. I'm not gonna spell out why Corinne's afraid to come out. I feel like that one should be obvious.
Listen, I don't want to generalize, but I feel like even kids that come from like very queer friendly homes are still like very concerned about coming out. Like it's scary. Like it's a big deal, you know?
Yeah, it is. And you know it's going to change perceptions of you. And that's why I kind of like that you guys didn't belabor the point, because it's like, we are more than our trauma. Like, it is not all about the queer trauma. There are other things happening here. And it's something I really liked about both books. And Nita, because you mentioned that the story is set in North Carolina, and I believe Mason, yours is as well. This is the newer one, correct? One of my favorite, very small Southern things from, I believe it was from The Ghost We Keep, is where 1 million people in the neighborhood and the community start bringing casseroles over after the funeral, and it just goes on and on and on. And I was like, oh my God, that is the most Southern thing that I remember so specifically from growing up in North Carolina. And I would just love to know like how your writing and your conception of these books was influenced by living in the South and being from the South. Because you both included so many great little details that I just loved. I was like, this is North Carolina, oh my God.
I think that it just comes from my experience of having lived in a very small town. The Ghost We Keep is set in my hometown of Kinston. And that scene that you mentioned is just directly inspired by what happened after my father died. Like that night we went back to the house and like everyone, like my mother's friends and family were like, in the house, people just started cleaning, and I probably should have been thinking about other things, but I just thought about how weird it was that I could just hear someone vacuuming our living room. And it was like, I think it had to have been midnight at that point. the South is weird, and I love it. It's a very weird, odd place. Um, and then honestly, I think that my favorite detail, and I can't remember it exactly, but I mentioned like cookout in the book. But I think I also bring up the fact that like our town's claim to fame is a Walmart, which literally it's Kinston's claim to fame, and the fact that they just got a Starbucks last year. I think it's like just got a Starbucks. I think that everything that I write, sort of I wanted to exude this, I guess like Southern charm would like be the way to describe it, but it is also just the way I grew up. My third book starts off in Charlotte, North Carolina, but moves to California, and that was fun because I got to do a lot of research about Los Angeles and Beverly Hills, and just things that did not make sense to me in any way, shape, or form. Um, which again was tough because my POV character is a character who like experiences all of that and knows it all super well. But it was also fun to get his perspective on the things he doesn't understand about the South and about growing up, like even or not growing up, but like attending school even in a city as big as Charlotte. Yeah, I just think that it's a part of me and it's a part of how I grew up, and so my mind almost kind of like defaults to that in a way.
I'm still laughing at Kinston's claim to fame being the Walmart because for fun context, I think the first time Mason and I met, I figured out they were from Kinston. My entire family is from Kinston. My parents are the first ones out of their family to ever not live in Kinston, so I am very familiar with Kinston. I don't think y'all got a cookout till like years later, because I remember going to visit.
It was definitely, I think, 2019.
Yeah, I remember going to visit my Nana and like wanting to take her to cookout and having to drive to Goldsboro.
Yep. That was where the closest one was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like Mason, I'm from here. I'm from outside of Wake County I'm from the like Wake County, Johnston County border, if you're familiar with either of those. Johnston County. But I wanted to write about the South, but funnily enough, I for some reason picked a main character who is not from the South because Corinne is from Colorado. But I was like, I'm just gonna pour every single Southern thing into Maggie's character, and I'm pretty sure there's a part, and I took this from my family, where Corinne is texting Maggie about Christmas, and Maggie's like, yeah, I'm going down to Kinston where my family is, and we're gonna go do a pig picking for Christmas. And I was like, yes, that is exactly what my family does every year, is cook a giant pig, and it is delicious. So it was fun for me to put, because from growing up here, it was fun for me to have Corinne's perspective as an outsider, because I could have her character be a little more critical of the things that are, I think, weird to outsiders in the South, like the weird, especially in small town North Carolina, the weird, everybody literally knows everybody knows everybody's secrets, everybody goes to church with somebody's mother. Even if you don't go to church, you go to church with somebody's mother. So I got to include that facet of it and include it in a way that like having a character be a little more bewildered by it than me, who grew up here. And it's book 2 has been a change because book 2 is set in World War II Germany. So I was like, wow, I get to bring literally none of this in. Damn it, like it's completely different culture.
I was muted. A garbage truck was going by. My apologies. I was just going to say, for all of our audience members who are not from the South, I'm going to tell you that barbecue, pig picking, and cookout, both incredibly location accurate to feature in a book. And thinking on Southern expectations, and really just expectations that you get from everyone in your life in general. Corinne and Liam both want very different things for themselves than the people around them want for them in their lives. And why do you think it's so hard for us to go against others' expectations of us? And do you think it's important to do that at some point in your life?
I think at some point, yes, because at some point you're going to have to rely on your own expectations for yourself rather than other people's expectations. I think sometimes when you're a teenager, especially, it's very easy to get caught up in what everyone else expects of you. I especially did want to like talk about that in this book with like the pressure that gets put on teenage girls in particular to be a certain way, to act a certain way, to like not or not act a certain way, honestly. So I wanted to explore that. And Corinne, a lot of her life is very much about like, I'm going to go along literally with what everybody else wants from me. And because that is going to make things easier, and because that is going to make the people around me happy. And the book is kind of her figuring out like, oh, right, I'm allowed to also be happy. And like, as someone who still has trouble figuring out boundaries and setting boundaries in general in my own life, I'm a Pisces, I think it comes with the territory. It's just, it's something I wanted to like to include and work through, because I think it's, I mean, I'm 27, so it's still something that I'm also trying to like figure out too, is what do I want? And I think it can change over your life. And I think you have to continually like ask yourself that question, like stop and pause and be like, okay, what do I want? Is what I'm doing, does that align with what I want? Am I only going along with what I want because it's what someone else expects of me? So
I think that, I mean, I don't think there's anything I can add to to Nita's answer. Like, you're pretty much like captured my feelings on it. I think growing up queer, probably especially in the South, I think there is like this certain, this certain expectation for kids, because like, the South is not 100% like, the hoity-toity redneck, like we hate the gays, like place that everyone thinks it is. Like, there's homophobia all over the US. I just want to say that the South is not as bad as y'all think it is, and we all see your cut the red states jokes that you make on Twitter. But I think that growing up queer in the South, there comes the expectation, that inherent expectation. Like, I think that just over the last maybe 4 years, my mother stopped expecting me to give her grandchildren. Probably helps that my brother is is finally giving her one. But like every time she would say like, I can't wait to have grandkids, I'm like, you're gonna have to rely on my brother for that. I was like, I can't pop a baby out myself, so so I just think there's like that extra territory that comes with being queer and living in the South, and like these expectations that are set up. Nita and I don't know how close our experiences growing up were, but I can imagine they may have been very similar. I feel like there are a lot of similarities between queerness and the South. Yeah, I honestly just think it kind of comes with the territory, and Liam especially kind of mirrors my own experience of wanting to get out of the small town experience. And I still actively do. Like, I would love to live in bigger cities that are not Charlotte, that have more things going on, and it's not just banks. And so I think yeah, Liam was kind of like my proxy for getting that out there. And I swear it's changing with book 3, but apparently I can't write a book that's like not about a kid wanting to pursue an art. Which again is just what I grew up wanting to do. I promise that's not in book. Well, no, it is in book 3. Damn it. That's not the main character though. That's different. Yeah, it's kind of what we grew up with.
Oh, for sure.
Based on that grandchildren.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nita.
No, the grandchildren comment. My mom has finally stopped asking. My mom actually got pretty good about not asking, and I'm an only child, so this is I'm the only hope. But her friends
at least
ask
I have an excuse.
Right, her friends ask her now. They're like, oh, but because I live with my partner, and they're all like, oh, but like, aren't you sad that like Nita's not going to give you grandchildren? And my mom's like, no, that's not the point. It's like, okay, good. At least we have grasped the lack of grandchildren concept.
Good for mom, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, at least she can field those questions, and you don't.
Right. They don't come to
do
me,
it, which is nice.
Which is the good point.
A real ally.
Now, I have kind of a fun question that I want to ask the two of you. I would like to know, because I know that you've both read each other's books, so I can ask you some fun questions about each other's books. I want to know what character in your own novel you most identify with and why, and then what character in each other's novels you most identify with and why.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
I know, I'm being
Disclaimer, I'm still halfway through The Ghosts We Keep. So Mason, I might pick someone from your first novel.
It's fine. I was gonna ask, like, wait, what do I pick from and what does Nita pick from?
Oh, all published works are on the table here. We'll say that.
Okay. I think I have to pick Liam because I used to say that I Wish You All the Best was like the most biographical book that I would write, but I think The Ghost We Keep has firmly taken that spot, and thankfully book 3 is leagues away from anything super personal that I have to write about. So I think I really relate to Liam as well as Marcus, just because of their experiences and the things they go through in the book, and I'm not gonna spoil that. I think from Nita, I think I have to go with Corinne because of how raw I felt the grief in that book was. I was lucky enough to get to read it for a blurb, and so I almost felt this responsibility to like not be able to share with anyone besides like a vague, hyping it up. Like obviously I couldn't share like plot details like beyond the synopsis. So it was almost like my own little secret I had to keep. But yeah, I think Corinne, I think the grief is so raw and very real in that book, and getting to see that through her eyes was just like it felt very rich. If that's a good word to use to describe. I'm a writer, in case you couldn't tell. I have a mastery of words.
I love that. For mine, I'd actually probably, we don't get to see a lot of her, but I'd probably go with Maggie. I think I don't think I was as angry as Corinne was when I was in high school. And for I think what I wanted to put into Maggie was all the stuff that like, oh, I love about the South, and I love about being queer, and I love about living here. So probably I think I actually identify with her a little bit more. Like, I love Corinne, but I don't think I was her that much when I was in high school. I could be wrong. Mason, from yours, I'm gonna say Ben, just because the whole like that anxiety thing felt very true with their character, and they're like figuring out their whole arc and like figuring out with like therapy and their own like mental illness and stuff. I was like, this is relatable. This is relatable. Like,
I apologize.
No, you're good. I wish I had therapy in high school. Like, I think that would have done a lot of good, alas. Yeah, definitely. But I think the way that you handled that was just so good. It felt so real and true to life. So
I think we all agree that Ben was a sarcastic, anxious little mess of a human, and I absolutely love them. It was
God,
for
I
sure
love
my
writing
favorite
Ben,
character
like,
from I Wish You All the Best. 'Cause it's like, I am seen.
I have such fond memories of like writing that dry like sense of humor, and I don't want to keep harping on book 3 because that's not what I'm here to talk about. But like, book 3's Neil is like such a little smarmy asshole, and I love doing that. Oh God, it's so much fun.
Well, honestly, I think it's cool because I don't know. I remember being a teenager, and half the time sarcasm is like your love language with your friends when you're a teenager.
Exactly.
And I love that
It's
you guys
still
both, to a greater or lesser extent, show that, because a lot of YA books don't always capture that very well. And another thing that you guys both capture so well that I loved are these little, and Nita, you mentioned it before, these little funny instances of like queer stereotypes that are actually true. like the fact that we travel in packs, and that is absolutely a thing. Like, whenever I see queer characters in a YA novel and they're the solitary one, I'm like, 10 out of 10 did not happen. That is not who they would hang out with at all.
no, there's one part in Who I Was With Her, speaking of queer stereotypes, where Corinne sees Alyssa, and Alyssa has her keys in a carabiner on her belt, and I was just like, we go with the butch stereotype here, because the amount of people, like butches I've met who just keep all their keys, and my partner keeps her keys in a carabiner on her belt. And I was just like, have to include my Ring of Keys moment in this book. It has to be in here somehow. Makes it.
I'm sorry.
No, but I love that though, because there's a big difference to me between like harmful queer stereotypes in books and queer stereotypes that you can tell were written by a queer person, that it feels like this funny little code of like, for the 20% of people that will get this little joke's for you. And I absolutely love that about these books.
I mean, it's like our culture. It's like our own little private joke almost with each other. And so like, yeah, I can't, maybe it's because I haven't read these books in like such a long time. I can't remember any specific instances. Oh my gosh. But yeah, like I think it reads like our own little, like, it's like our jokes between each other, and you know, some people will get them and some people won't, and that's fine.
Yeah, for sure. If either of you could go back and tell your teenage self one thing, what would it be?
Go to therapy.
Whew, that's real.
Oh boy. Ooh, that's the magic one. Oh my God, I don't know. Like, oh my gosh, I don't know, because like I'm here because of the things that I didn't know and the things that I did know. And it's like, I feel like that's such a cop-out answer though. It's like, oh, I wouldn't change anything. I'd probably tell myself that like things are okay, and like the feelings that you feel, there's nothing wrong with them. You don't have to, not to get like deep here, you don't have to make a bargain with yourself that if you can get this girl to go out with you, then you don't have to be queer anymore. Sorry that got like really deep, or like too dark.
Big mood.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. Come on. Get deep.
But it's like, you know, things are going to be okay, and like you are the way that you are meant to be, and you should not try to change that about yourself. Like there's no use in pretending to be someone who is not you, and all that you get from that is like unhappiness and like these awful feelings of like self-deprecation and self-hatred. So like, yeah, just, you know, be you. So cheesy. Oh my god. Oh my god. Be you. No, just be yourself.
I mean, joking aside, I think, yeah, I'd probably tell like baby Nita the same thing. I was gonna joke again and be like, tell baby Nita, hey, you're not cis, by the way. But like, I think that would have blown little teenage me's mind. And I think I needed to, I don't think I needed to figure that out until I was 24. So that process happened like, you know, in it the way that it should have. I think I would have told them like, you know, just I think honestly what people told Corinne, like, you're gonna be okay. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Like, oh my God, I know you think you have to have it all figured out by now.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't. You're 17 and like you're the only person who expects that you're going to have it all figured out at this point. Like literally, I don't think anyone else expects you to have it figured out by now. So like it's totally okay. You know, if you don't, it's totally okay. You switch your major 2 times in college. It's okay that you like almost fail your first semester. Like it's fine. Everything is fine. You're gonna be okay. Also, humor is only a coping mechanism sometimes.
Very true. See, kids, you too can go through all of the ups and downs of this and still be a best-selling author. Maybe because of these things.
Mind that pain somehow.
You will definitely still be 25 and still not know what you're doing.
Fair. I'm 27. I don't know what I'm doing. What am I doing? Who knows?
What is anything? Who knows? I'll just going through the motions of each day.
Oh, that's real.
I feel that so deeply.
I feel like someone's gonna watch this panel and just be like, "Are they okay? Are they all okay?"
No, we're not. We're really not.
But no, nobody's okay. So go write about it.
Nobody's okay. It's fine. Turn your trauma into profit.
Right. Well, on that note, I really want to thank both of you so much for coming to do this. I wish we could have done it in person, and we will get you here in person at some point, I am determined when the world is semi-normal again. I just want to thank both of you, and I'm going to shamelessly plug both of the books. Who I Was With Her is already out and wonderful, and you should definitely go get it. And then The Ghost We Keep comes out on June 1st, and your copy will actually be like a pretty matte copy, not like my
Yes.
galley copy here with like the uncorrected proof at the top. Yours will be all pretty, just like this one.
Yes.
Definitely plan to get both of the books. And thank you both so much for coming to do this with Greensboro Bound. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
This is so much fun. I miss Greensboro.
Thank you again for joining us for 21 Conversations. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like and share with your friends and fellow readers. One final reminder that Greensboro Bound is a nonprofit organization committed to bringing together readers and writers throughout the year at zero cost to our community. Please help Greensboro Bound maintain that commitment with a sustaining or one-time gift now. The number to text to give and our website are on your screen. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you in person next year at Greensboro Bound.